Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Sunday Morning Apocalypse. No, just kidding. Ranking the studio albums. Today we're going to talk about Evergrey. Hopefully you guys caught that if you're an Evergrey fan. Got Rich Catino in the co-captain's chair today.
Morning, everybody. What's up?
Happy Sunday to everybody. Hope you're all enjoying your
Yep.
weekend. Much asked about. We finally got into it. We're going to talk about Swedish progressive power gothic metal veterans. They've been around now over 20 years. Evergrey,
Right.
band that I followed from the very beginning. I've always dug these guys. I think Tom Englund has one of the most unique voices in all of metal. He's a damn fine guitar player, a good songwriter. There's a reason why he got handpicked to be the next singer in Redemption, right? But he's still keeping true to his main band, Evergrey. So we got 11 studio albums. We're going to rank them as we like them. I'm going to have Rich kick us off with his number 11.
All right. I'm going with Torn from 2008. So this, and oddly enough, when I was writing about these albums, Torn and Apocalypse and Glorious Collision are all like on the same page, which is weird because they're all part of that block of time between 2006 and 2011. So I put Torn at the 11 space just because I think the albums around this period, the guitars are really tuned down low. I don't know what they're at, but I was looking up their tabs and stuff, and it goes from D to C to something, a couple others in between, and it keeps on changing, but they're all pretty low. And it has a different guitar tone, and it's really heavy and thick, and it's almost nu metal-ish at times, depending on what the song is. And that's probably why I don't like these albums as much, because I hate it. I hate nu metal. But still, the songs, there's a lot of good songs that are on the albums because he still has those melodies and those harmonies and the choruses. So it kind of counterbalances maybe the more modern sounds and textures to the songs a little bit. But with that, that's why I put it towards that at the bottom for me, because it has that feel to it. So Broken Wings, I thought, had more familiar rhythms and melodies. Soaked had more space in the riffs and the music, not as heavy and dense. When Kingdoms Fall, Numb feels influenced by nu metal, I thought, those two. And then with the breakdowns too, the rhythm chugs. So that's what throws this off for me. That's why I put it at my 11.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get you. They definitely kind of fell into a trap for a couple of years. And I don't know whether that's just something they consciously wanted to do or whether the record label, because, their Torn is their first record for SPV, if I'm not mistaken. And, this is, 2008? I mean, nu metal's kind of dead at that point, right? So, like, why bother?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I think it's 2008. Yeah. I mean, what label was it? Yeah, SPV. Yep.
SPV. Yeah, they went from Inside Out to SPV. Now they're on AFM, and all reputable labels, and none of them nu metal labels. So I don't know whether they just. I mean, Evergrey's kind of a weird band because they've kind of always been sort of on the cusp of potentially breaking out, but they never have. And maybe that was their way to say, hey, you know what? I thought we were supposed to be a breakout band and we haven't yet. So maybe let's add a little something to our sound to maybe get that exposure. But it just didn't fit with the time, right? They were kind of like 5 years too late to that, at least.
Right. Or just the tuning itself, maybe just their choice in tuning also did that, even if it wasn't intentional. It just happened that way because it's so much lower.
Yeah. And for anybody who hasn't listened to this band, all right, so here we're going on and on like we're assuming everybody knows all about Evergrey. I mean, at their core, these guys are kind of like a gothic sounding power metal band with lots of progressive overtones. So you got the big riffs, shredding solos, the really emotional vocals, lots of synths and keyboards in the background, right? Not overly complex music. I mean, this is not Dream Theater or anything like that. These guys are really, really different. And they got a formula. But like Rich mentioned, it's like they have a couple albums where they just went for this kind of like nu metal-y chugga chugga sound with the really down-tuned riffing, and it just was a little weird for them, I always thought.
Yeah. And they're proggy, but they're very like almost somber too at times. It's not depressing. It's like kind of somber and very, because the songs are all very much about like relationships and people and breakups and love and all that type of thing.
I always thought of them as kind of like a less doomy My Dying Bride, sort of. They have that kind of emotion that kind of hits very similar in a way.
Yeah,
So
kind of Paradise Lost-ish as well. Like I
yeah,
thought of the first two
true. Yeah, without the extreme vocals. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
a little bit. Yeah.
All right, my number 11 is the one that came right before Torn. That's Monday Morning Apocalypse from 2006. So for me, and this was their last album for Inside Out. This was like a real, like, kind of off the beaten path release after all those early classic albums. And this one, totally modern metalish,
Yeah.
less progressive elements. I don't know what they were doing with the vocals, but his vocals are way overproduced on this album, almost to the point of they're kind of distracting. Still a couple good songs. At Loss for Words is pretty cool. Still in the Water. Dark I Walk Through You Through also is really good. But I think most fans who had followed them from the beginning, when they heard this album, they were like, what the hell happened here? And I was one of them. And
I was one of them.
Still to this day, I'm like, and again, this is one of the 3 albums that Rich was talking about earlier. I think I definitely like this one the least. I rarely reach for this anymore because it's really not a really good Evergrey album. And this is a catalog where I can say 95%, if not more, of all their albums are actually very enjoyable. I don't really enjoy this one too much.
Yeah, I agree. It's coming up soon for me as well. All right, so 10, I'm going with The Glorious Collision. It's in that block of albums. Also, what I hear in these albums too, and now I don't know where they started doing this or playing on them, unless they started at the beginning. Was Tom always playing on a 7-string, or did they do that around maybe Recreation Day or Inner Circle? I'm not sure.
I don't know if he was doing it from the beginning. To be honest, I really don't know.
Okay, so I get that feeling with these albums too. It's like I think they're mostly on 7 strings now at this point for all these albums too.
Yeah,
so I get a very Nevermore feel on this album for a lot of the riffs and the arrangements, but not as good as Nevermore, because Nevermore, I love Nevermore. So
yeah,
but Nevermore never sounded like nu metal.
Correct.
So, but the type of riffing and maybe the way they're tuned is very similar. It's familiar for me to Nevermore. So I mentioned the song. I mean, I wrote down the song "You," which felt like Nevermore. "Wrong" is more tuneful and melodic. "Restoring the Lost" had a good chorus, but the songs, the way they're arranged, they're like they don't know if they want to be heavy or if they want to be melodic. And the production is really harsh, or there's something with the production and the guitar tones and the way it's mixed. It just doesn't. I don't know if it's harsh or too brutal or too unpolished. It's something, and that's why it's at my 10.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. That's my number 10 as well. And I gotta say, I don't like the cover. I don't like the back cover. I'm not really sure what they were going at with this. This is their second album for SPV. All right, so they're on the new label, which they've already left. You know what? It's interesting when you talk about the production of this album, because I think they were going for a more polished, less heavy sound. It doesn't really come across that way though, because you're right. There is like a harshness to it, but it's not like, it's not an in-your-face guitar album. I think for me, they went a little overboard on the keyboards and the electronics in this album. There are your standard Evergrey catchy hooks all over the place on here. You mentioned "You." "You" is a great song, really memorable. I like "Wrong." "Wrong" has that kind of like gothic metal feel to it, which I dig. "The Disease," another good song, great vocal from him. "Leave It Behind Us," another good song. And I love "Frozen," I think, which is a really awesome, like, progressive power metal song. But there's a lot of songs on here. Some of them are kind of unmemorable. I don't know. For me, this album just, like, it's good, but it's a little all over the place for me. And I just get the impression that they're a little kind of stuck within themselves as to which kind of way they want to go. Do we keep doing the same thing? Do we want to try new things? Some of it works, some of it doesn't. I don't think it's a terrible album by any means. I think it's way better than Monday Morning Apocalypse, but it's definitely one of the lower rung of Evergrey albums.
Yeah, I think you have to, like I said, I think you have to prefer what type of guitar sound you prefer. I think that's your preference, the person's preference when it comes to this band. Because when I was listening to the albums, I was listening to them really quick too, to compare and contrast guitar tones back and forth. And like I said, I noticed these three, between Apocalypse and Glorious Collision, and even up to the Atlantic, there's a lot of familiarity between a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard plenty of people talk about this band and how there's not enough variety from album to album to album, and that so many of them sound very similar. I mean, they're another one of those bands that have a formula. They kind of stick to it. That's either good or bad, depending on, your outlook on it.
Yeah, yeah, but you're wearing a Sabotage shirt, and they have a formula, but it's not really a formula for them, because if you listen to Wake of Magellan or Edge of Thorns or Mountain King, it still sounds like the same band, but they don't sound like the same album.
No, I mean, you could argue that every Sabotage album, every single one of them sounds completely different than the one that came before.
Correct, but it still sounds like
Sabotage. It's Sabotage. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's Sabotage. With Evergrey, you could listen. If someone put a blindfold on you and they just play you a bunch of songs, it's Evergrey. You probably don't know what album it's on, because they all could come from any of the albums, right?
Great point. That's a great way to compare it. Yep. Okay, so then I'm going to Monday Morning Apocalypse next, from 2006. This one, going with that one. Yep. So that's number 9. It's like I said, more like Nevermore, less prog. The guitar tones are lower, more chugging, but the piano on Till Dagmar sounds a little out of place as an interlude too, I thought. Like, it's got that, the album is really heavy and chugging and everything all of a sudden, and then you have this and it just sounds like it's out of place almost.
Yeah.
Even though they do their peaks and valleys and their melodic parts and they try different things, but on this album, I don't know, it just feels like it's out of place. But you mentioned The Dark I Walk Through You. I also wrote that one down too. It's more of a traditional Evergrey melody and harmonies. Not really, like you said, not something you're going to go back to, and I don't really go back to it either.
Yeah, I just I didn't care for it much when it came out, and I probably care for it even less after all these years, right? Because it's now been 14 years since that. I remember everybody really bitching and moaning when this album came out about how it was kind of like a departure for them, and and it seems like yesterday, and it's like, God, it's gonna be like 15 years ago almost. Crazy.
Yeah.
All right, well, we got the bottom third pretty much almost identical here. We got the same 3 albums. So my number 9 is Torn. I like this one, and I dig this album cover. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I like the artwork. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's really good. And I know we talk about it a lot on this show. Props to these guys for sticking with a logo, because I like the Evergrey logo, and they've been pretty consistent with that.
Yeah.
I like this album the best out of the trio that we're talking about here. I think so. This is their first for SPV Records. I think for the most part, this kind of brings, especially after Monday Morning Apocalypse, this brings them back for the most parts of the classic Evergrey sound. But it's still, like you mentioned, it's got that kind of slightly, modern new wave metal feel to it, which still puts some people off. But there's some really good songs on here. I think you mentioned Broken Wings, really good, big riffs, lots of cool, spooky keyboards. Fear absolutely crushes. Love that song. When Kingdoms Fall, really progressive track. That song totally reminds me.
I wrote that one down too. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of their old classic stuff.
Yeah.
What else? In Confidence and Numb. I think you mentioned one or both of them.
Numb felt like new metal to me.
Yeah, it's totally got those riffs. It carries over from the last album. Overall, though, I think it's a pretty enjoyable album, and I don't mind this one too much. Now that we got these 3 out of the way, I think we can safely say the rest of the catalog is pretty damn good.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. All right. So let's see. Number 8, I'm going with the first one, The Dark Discovery. So the first 2, when you get into Nevermore, if you start at the beginning, actually, the first 2 are not so different. Yeah. Cool album cover too.
Oh yeah. Big time.
They're not so different from In Search of Truth or Recreation Day. It's just not as focused and polished as those 2 albums. But it's a little more proggy doom with goth keys, I think, that album, which is cool. I like the mix of those, because I like a little bit of goth and I like prog and I like doom. So it is an interesting mix for them to start off, to give themselves their own unique sound.
Yeah.
For, establishing themselves as a band. So I did think that Beyond Salvation, it's kind of ballad-esque, but it reminds me of Old Fate's Warning.
A little bit. I could see that. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of those moments that it's like Old Faith's Warning. Closed Eyes has a good, clean vocal and melody. Trust and Betrayal. Trust and Betrayal is focused riffs and leads. Shadowed, the backing keys, good changes, and the twin riffs on When the River Calls in the solo section, the aggressive solo section.
Yep.
So
It's a solid debut. It's a really solid
debut. It has a lot of good moments on it, and it's definitely a good start and where they're going to be possibly going next.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know most people when you talk about those early Evergrey albums, they're like, oh wow, the first album is decent, but man, did they really improve with that second album? But I think most people forget that the first album, they released it in 98, but they actually recorded that in 96. So there was actually a gap between that first album when they put that together and the second album, and you could really see the maturity in the band over that span of time. But it's not like it was just a year. We're talking a couple of years here, so that's not really surprising. Yeah, good album. I dig that album, as we'll talk about in a minute. Let's see, where are we here? Number 8, right? Okay.
Number 8, yeah.
I'm going to go with 2016's The Storm Within. Another great album cover. I mean, they have quite a few really good album covers, I think. This is one of them. And again, this part of the ranking is tough for me because I really like all these albums a lot, some pretty equally. So it was kind of hard to put them in an order. But I think this is a really strong record. Celebrates their 20th anniversary. It's their second album for AFM Records. You got great tunes on here like The Distance, Passing Through, In Orbit. It's got a cool duet with Floor Jansen from Nightwish, which is cool. She also appears. Yeah, I mean, she's on another song too. She's on Disconnect, and that's not really a duet, but she's doing like kind of these ethereal background vocals, which is pretty cool. Someday is really memorable with a killer chorus. I think it's just a really strong album, and I enjoy this one quite a bit of their latter period albums. So they've got a lot of good ones, and that's one of them.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So number 7, I'm going with the newest one, The Atlantic. So, like you said, it's good with the most good for great cover too.
Oh yeah,
I think it's actually my favorite cover.
It's amazing, right? And there's a lot going on here. It's like if you don't look at it really carefully, you're gonna miss some of the things that are happening here. Like you got this kind of like this giant bird coming out of the house there. You got the tidal wave there. You got this old ship. I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. And if you open the whole thing up, you get the whole picture here. Very cool. Most of their album covers are really, really interesting. Like I didn't show the whole on this, but that's pretty cool stuff, right?
Yep. I love it when they do that. So it's like it's almost like reading what did I write down here? It's like reading. It's like reading like poetry with the cover art for like the poetry. That's what the cover reminds me of, like a book or something. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yep. Got Silent Arc, All I Have video. There's cinematography in there. It's like a movie. Yeah. For those two. And it's got a good production too. I think it's better than The Storm Within. A little bit. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. This album sounds really good. It definitely. Yeah, it's good, better production and mix. It doesn't sound as cluttered or smothered at all. Yeah. Yeah. And this was so this was from 2019. This, if I'm not mistaken, this was either a top 10 or a top 15 album for me for the year. Okay. I mean, I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Yeah, it's still pretty heavy too. It's got that the lower guitar sounds, but still the melodies and the harmonies, I think, are a little more classic for me. Yeah, I agree. It's my number 7 as well. Oh, all right. I think the formula keeps on chugging along, and it's okay. Yeah. No real surprises here, like Rich mentioned, but it's all really good. I think most of the tracks are a little bit longer on this album, if I remember correctly. I mean, we're looking 6, 7, 8 minutes for almost every single song, which is okay. I think they're injecting a little more prog on this album, a little less of the nu metal thing, even though you do have a little bit of those riffs. But you mentioned The Silent Arc, which is great. Weightless, fantastic song. And The Silence, and I really dig the complex This Ocean, which is a really cool kind of epic sounding track, and I think again sees them bringing a little bit more of the prog influence back in. But I like this one a lot, and you never know, in time this may even rank higher, because I think probably for both of us that this still is a little new, right? So with a lot of these other albums we got a lot of history with, so it's going to take a while for something like this one to kind of creep up the ladder. But
right in the middle of the pack
Cool.
for the most part. So it's a good one.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go with the Storm Within for the next one for 6. So I wrote down Distance. It's got the heavier guitar and bass again. Passing Through has a good energy and movement. Someday, Astray. In Orbit, the duet with Floor is great. Love that song. The Lonely Monarch, twin lead harmonies in the solo, and Disconnect, the layers on the chorus too. So again, enjoyable, solid, and it's better. It's moved away from those other 3 albums.
Yeah. I think these 2 albums we just talked about make a good kind of like 1-2 punch as a latter part of the catalog. They're going right back in a really good direction, I think.
Yes, agreed.
Which is good. Just out of curiosity, how did you like the album, if you've heard it, the album that he did with Redemption?
I heard it, but it's been a while, so I'd have to go back to and revisit it. I don't remember much of it. So is it more like a Evergrey album, or is it still a Redemption album is the question?
Well, I mean, here's the problem. It's like, I think that Redemption had a very cool, specific sound. And to me, that sound has Ray on vocals, right? And one of the things when I first got that album, well, with Tom on vocals, is I was afraid it was going to sound like an Evergrey album because, man, he is just so unique. His voice is so unique, and it's just like everything about him screams Evergrey.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the problem with that album. It still kind of sounds like a Redemption album, but man, he is just so like, because I mean, Tom is like overpowering almost to a point.
I was going to say his voice dominates it.
Yeah, totally. So it's like, so I hear less Redemption. It's a good album. It's a really good album, actually. But I hear less of like distinct Redemption than I do just Tom Englund.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I don't know.
Is
he still going to be in the band going forward? I don't even know.
I think bands would be better off just going with somebody totally new instead of taking someone else from another band.
Yeah.
For their band. It crosses over too much. And
that's what I thought. When I heard the news that they were getting him to sing, I was like, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I agree with you. It's like, maybe it would be, and I get it, he's a name, right? But I just think that for Redemption, it might have been better to just bring in someone maybe unknown, or maybe someone who's, a little less known and so dominant. I mean, because Tom is like this absolute presence, right? And it's just, it's a really good Redemption album. It really is. But I don't know how many more of those I want to hear, because it's just so much him, and I want to hear that whole band. And I thought Ray, that was a band, right? Because Ray's got that voice that just like mixes in so well, whether it's with Redemption or Fate's Warning. Anyway, I'm going off the deep end with this, but I was just curious what you thought, because now that we're talking about this, it's like I remember like having really strong feelings about that when that album came out. So anyway,
I have to go back. I gotta go back and revisit it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what you think. I mean, it's a very good album. I just I miss Ray in that band. But I could totally understand why Ray wants to go back and spend all his time with Fate's Warning, because man, Fate's Warning have been on fire these last couple albums. I can't wait for the new one.
Right. Did you ever do a Fate's Warning ranking?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I did. I don't think I did a Fate's Warning top 10 song show though. If you're interested in that, we can talk afterwards. All right, my number 6, The Dark Discovery, the debut. It's amazing, I was just looking at this. Look at how young they look.
Yes.
Especially Tom in the middle there. Holy smokes, what was he, like maybe 20, if that? Another thing that we have not talked about with this band, they have been plagued by constant lineup changes.
Yes.
I mean, throughout their career, they just can't keep a steady lineup at all. It doesn't hurt too much, because some bands that keep changing lineups, the sound is constantly different. Tom has managed to keep this band always sounding like Evergrey, but Jesus, it's like every time you blink, there's another second guitar player, another drummer, another bass player. They've changed keyboard players. It's just crazy. But regardless, it's still Evergrey. Like Rich mentioned, really strong album. You got Andy LaRocque from King Diamond producing this album.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, and you know what? Pretty good sounding album, I think. Andy does a good job. Black and Dawn is a really, really classic Evergrey track, really heavy. December 26th is another cool song. The title track is good, Beyond Salvation. And I love the gut-wrenching emotional Closed Eyes. I think is really, really good. Trust and Betrayal is another good one. Really solid album. Their songwriting skills, not quite there, but as a debut from a really young band, I think it's pretty damn terrific. And
Yeah.
I remember, when this album and the second and third album came out, I would listen to these three all the time. And it's a dark album, probably one of their darker albums, and pretty heavy. And I think you hit on that kind of little bit of a doom vibe going on throughout this album as well.
Yeah, little gothy, little doom.
Yeah, and I love the album cover on here. Really, really cool. So that's my number 6.
Okay. All right, number 5, going with the second one, Solitude, Dominance, and Tragedy. So that one is similar to Dark Discovery, but I think it's definitely not much better, but definitely better. Definitely a few more steps forward. Not by leaps and bounds, but you could definitely see they're moving towards their classic sound and their styling with that one. I really like this album. It's very cool. It's more focused, better production and mix, I thought, than the first one.
Yeah, another production by Andy. Yeah, he did a good job, though. Yeah.
Solitude within the harmonies between the guitars and the keys. There's a harp and a violin on the album, which is nice. I think that works pretty good. Nosferatu sounds like a Symphony X song.
Yeah, it's a great song too. Yeah,
great song. I like that element on this album. It's got that Symphony X feel too.
Yeah,
that prog metal, a little bit of power mixed together.
Yeah, this might be their most prog metal-y album, I think.
Yeah, and I think it works great. For them. She Speaks to the Dead is cool. Damnation. The album is a mix of heavy riffs and dark mellow parts, I thought.
Yeah. Yep. More about that in a couple minutes. I'm a big fan of that album. All right, my number 5. This is one of those albums that could even rank higher. I think I am liking this album more and more as time goes on. This is really a corker of an album. Hymns for the Broken from 2014.
Okay.
This is their debut album for AFM Records, and probably, well, obviously based on my ranking here, their best album of the last decade. And that's saying something. So here we got, completely new lineup again, but it's still Evergrey. You have a mix by Jacob Hansen, who's worked with everybody. This album sounds big and potent. Really good production on here. King of Errors and A New Dawn are killer songs. Possibly top 10 Evergrey songs, both of them right there.
The guitar player came back though. Henry came back on this album. So I think that's a key to why this album is so great too.
I think so, because he's a great player, right? And him and Tom work so well together. So good point. Wake a Change is a great ballad. When these guys do some really good ballads, man, it's like, and he's got that emotional vocal style, which just works really well. You got the ethereal keys in the background, really, really good. Archaic Rage is another emotional number, which has a killer Tom vocal on it. Black Undertow is brutally heavy. And back into the album, you got The Grand Collapse and The Aftermath, which are both these big, epic, symphonic metal, like classic tracks that are, again, some of the best songs they've ever done, I think, are on this album.
I think so too.
But there's a lot of material on here, and for me, this album is still fairly new in the pantheon of Evergrey, and this has steadily been going up the list of my favorites. I'm still very partial to a couple of the early albums, which we're going to get to, but this is like nipping at the heels. I mean, I don't know. Do you? Well, obviously you haven't talked about it yet either, so I think
it's up there for me too. Yep. Yep. Where are we at? 4, right?
Number 4. Yep.
So go with the Inner Circle for number 4. So this one is when did this one come out?
2004.
2004. So I gotta find my notes here. 11 albums, I got 4 pages of notes. So I think A Touch of Blessing is one of their best songs ever. Love that song.
Amazing. Yeah, it is.
I love the peaks and valleys, the keys, the dance with the guitars. In the Wake of the Weary is great. I think there's like Dream Theater twists with the female duet. The strings from the Gothenburg Orchestra's on this.
Yep.
That's also a nice inclusion on this album. The piano ballad "Waking Up Blind" is great. What else you got here? Dramatic. He's got the dramatic spoken word going through When the Walls Go Down, which he does that a lot on albums too. You get that he does that kind of poetic spoken word on a lot of tracks, maybe on maybe one or two for each album almost.
He does, especially the early stuff. Yeah.
So that's cool too. So yeah, that's a strong number 4 for me.
It's also my number 4.
All right.
Those the guys in the band right there. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything said. For me, to me, this is the kind of haunting prog metal album for these guys. There's a quality about this album. It's a little bit different than some of the other ones. And you mentioned A Touch of Blessing, classic song. Really great.
So good.
More Than Ever, another great song, and that one just absolutely crushes. The Essence of Conviction, another strong song, and I think you mentioned In the Wake of the Weary, another really good album. I love the production of this album. I think there's some really cool gothic elements to this album as well, but it just, for me, it's I always use haunting when I describe this album, and I think it has a lot to do with the lyrical content. I mean, these guys, most of these albums are in a weird way kind of concept albums, right? And that brings this kind of like darkness, because none of these stories are happy stories, unfortunately.
I know.
But there's a quality about this album. It's a little bit different than some of the other ones, but I dig it a lot. When this first came out, I was listening to this constantly. It was one of my favorites of that year.
I think it's in that another block of albums with In Search of Truth, Recreation Day, and Inner Circle.
Yeah.
You know, they were just scoring gold with those.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Okay, so next, what we got?
Number 3.
3, going with Hymns for the Broken. In my top 3, like you said, that's, man, I mean, you can't go wrong with that album. The King of Terrors, which you mentioned, it's got the traditional riffing and the guitar sound, the chorus section, the pleasing melodies and the keys and the piano on A New Dawn. Wake of Change, it's a focus back on the melodies and the music and the chorus, I thought. Yep. And not so much on the overbearing riffage going on, you know. Black Undertow, great riff and verses, title track, vocal, and the solo section, and the piano ballad "Missing You" is, I think, Tom's best vocal is that ballad.
He's one of those guys, you know, we're talking like the last 20 years. He's one of those singers that whenever you bring him up, everybody's like, oh yeah, Tom Eglin, he's wonderful. He's so unique. But yet, like when you see like lists and people talk about their favorite metal singers of the last couple decades, nobody ever mentions him until you remind them, and then they're like, oh yeah, that guy, right?
Right. It's like Fate's Warning. They're so great and they have so much great music and everything, and everybody always forgets Ray Alder, or just their catalog of albums. Another one of the bands.
Yep. Great singers, both of them.
Yeah, I know.
All right, my number 3, I'm going to go with 2001's In Search of Truth, the very cool concept album about alien abduction. I mean, man, I'm generally, I say this all the time, I'm generally not a lyrics guy. I don't always sit down and just follow along with the lyrics and try to decipher the storylines and all that kind of stuff. But man, this album is like, this is some spooky shit. Right. Mm-hmm. If you're whether you believe in alien abductions or the existence of extraterrestrials and all that kind of stuff, there's no denying that this reads like a little mini book, and they tell a pretty creepy tale of, you know, what could be, so to speak. And I always dug this album quite a bit. Yeah, it's just it has some of their classic songs on here. It's got, you know, The Master Plan, heavy, dark, Killer. Watching the Skies, you got the real nice Tender State of Paralysis. Mark of the Triangle.
I wrote it down, all the same songs you're writing down.
Dark Waters. I mean, it's just
Dark Waters.
And it's just such, I don't know. I really like this album a lot. And again, another one of those concept albums. And I've done shows on concept albums in metal and prog and stuff. And I always seem to forget about this one, but this is a really, really great one. If you dig this whole kind of alien abduction type of storyline, so to speak. And I believe he based the story of this album on like an alien abduction film. I forget which one it actually was, but he got the inspiration from watching one of those movies, and that's what he did. But very well done, and just the creepy ambiance in this whole album is just really, really
Yeah.
spot on. It fits the story so well.
Uh-huh. I'm just looking up the notes on the album, see if it says it. Yeah, it's based on a book, Communion.
There you go. Okay, so which they also made a movie on. Did you ever read that book? That was a Whitley Strieber book.
I should though.
You should. I read it when it came out. What year did that book come out? It was 80s, right? Or early 90s?
Let's see. 87.
87. So I read that when it came out, and without getting into the whole story of it, but I've actually in my life on two occasions. One when I was really, really young, when my family and we lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, New York, in the late 60s. And then another time later on, like maybe 20 years later, I had an identical dream. Okay. And both times in the dream was that little yellow man with the big black eyes walking down the hallway. And while he's walking, and I'm trying to scream and I can't, there's no one else in the apartment. And all I hear, remember the old days of television when they would do the test for the emergency broadcast system?
Yes. Well, you still hear that to this day once in a while too. They still do that, actually.
Right. Well, this whole dream was me alone, and I'm totally going off the rails here, but the dream I had when I was like 3, we were living in this apartment in Brooklyn. My parents were not home, so I'm home all by myself. My brother wasn't born yet, and I'm sitting in the living room in the dark watching television. All of a sudden, the TV goes out. The TV comes back on to the emergency broadcast thing, and it wouldn't stop. Yeah. And I'm like, and I'm like, it won't stop. It won't stop. And I'm a little kid. I'm like, what, 3, 4 years old. And next thing I know, I hear the front door shut. And if you walk out of our living room, there was a long hallway that led to the front door. So I go and I peek around the doorway of the living room and I look down the hall, and all the way at the end of the hall is this little guy, yellow colored with big black eyes. And he's slowly walking down the hall. The emergency broadcast system is blaring so loud I can't hear myself, and I'm trying to scream and I can't, and he keeps coming closer and closer and closer, and I wake up.
That's great.
I had the exact same dream to a T, like 20 years later.
Wow.
Like to a T, and I woke up like I can't believe I had that same dream again, because it's like a nightmare you don't want to relive. And then I remember when I read that when I saw that Communion book come out, I bought it, and I'm reading through this and I'm like, man, so much of this just sounds like that dream I experienced. Like, so I started thinking like, because who the hell knows, right? But you can't explain these things, right? But anyway, long story short, that my dream, that book, fantastic if you're at all semi-interested, whether you believe in it or not. And this album totally hits on all that stuff. Alien Abduction. Cool. I need a sip of my Republic of Tea here after that whole explanation, right?
I don't think enough metal bands write about aliens and abductions and that kind of experience.
I know, right?
As much as other things. But Gamma Ray's done it a few times, and I love Gamma Ray, and I told you should check those guys out because you're a big Halloween fan. So they've dabbled in that a little bit, which was very cool.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some bands, but not a lot, because you probably could do a ton with that. I think what's this? Oh, geez, I'm drawing a blank on the. I'll think of it. There's another band, a Swedish band that does a lot of alien abduction stuff. Hypocrisy also.
Hypocrisy, yes, that's right.
Peter Takrin has always done lots of alien abduction stuff, and I think Strapping Young Lad.
I was going to say Devin Townsend's got Zimrod. What the hell's his name?
Oh,
Ziltoid.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great too.
And he did one or two Strapping Young Lad albums that dealt with alien abduction and stuff like that. So yeah. They're out there, not as much as you would think, though.
Yeah. All right. So number 2, same album, In Search of Truth. So I mirror the same stuff you're talking about: the master plan, rules of the mind, watching in the sky, the piano sound on The State of Paralysis, Dark Waters. I basically noted all the same songs you're talking about. It's great. Yeah. I go back to this album all the time. Love it.
It's really strong, top to bottom. It's
very cohesive. It's a very cohesive album for them.
Yeah, I agree. For me, the top 3 or 4 are hard to beat, and looks like our number 1 is going to be the same, but we'll get to that in a minute.
and it should for everybody else.
My number 2 is the second album, and the reason why this is so high, again, I was into these guys from the beginning, and I remember buying this in the debut from Ken Golden at the Laser's Edge, and think I never heard these guys before because they were pretty new, and I was like, holy crap, this is pretty different, because they don't sound like anybody else. I think Evergrey, musically, vocally, are a very unique band. I dig this a lot. I like the production. Title track, Solitude Within, is so good. So memorable. You mentioned Nosferatu, awesome song. The Shocking Truth, She Speaks to the Dead, another great song. When Darkness Falls. I like the kind of nice gothic keyboards used throughout the album, and I think that Tom's vocals really come into their own on this album. He's really good on the first album, but I think it's here that it's like, wow, this guy's a force to be reckoned with, and I love that cover. Always have.
I was gonna say, when you're looking for music, and especially '98. A cover was a big thing too. It's always for metal. The cover kind of gets you a lot of times, especially in the '80s. And when we were buying albums, it was always the album art that you're like, oh damn, that looks really cool. I gotta buy this.
This stands out. Whether you see it in a rack somewhere, or you're looking online and you see, this, you're like, ooh, check that out. Pretty cool.
Yeah. In '98, it was great to hear something like that when America had all the other trendy crap going on.
Yep, exactly. Okay. Well, we know what number 1 is. Well, at least if you guys know the catalog, you know what number 1 is.
Yep, number 1, Recreation Day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this takes everything that the first 3 albums had and just polished it to make it gold, basically. It's focused, the driving riffs, the rhythms, but then you got the vocals and the harmonies and the hooks that are so big and singable on top of it. Even the heavy songs, the fast songs, they're still singable.
Yeah.
It's not overpowering, not overdriving. And I think this is still when they were doing the guitar tunings weren't as low either. I think they were doing either standard or maybe like a half step or full step down maybe or something before it got too deep and too down tuned, I think.
Yeah.
Correct. But The Great Deceiver, End of All Your Days, As I Lie Here Bleeding is one of my all-time favorites.
That's such a great song. Yeah.
The hook is so great.
Yeah.
Blinded, I'm Sorry, Visions, the title track. There's 11 songs and there's nothing you're going to skip.
Yeah, the whole album, start to finish, is just really good.
Yeah, love it. And that's where that classic lineup came up too, right? That's the first or second one with that lineup.
Yeah. With
Henrik and Michael and Patrick and Rickard. Is that how you pronounce his name? The keyboard player.
Yeah.
So that's part of that lineup as well.
Yeah, it's just this is classic Evergrey right here. So and you got the female vocals in the background, which was that Tom's wife? I'm trying to remember. I know she sang on the live album. I don't remember if she was on this one or not.
That was a great live album too. The DVD.
Awesome. and it was great because it's got all their like really great songs on it. Yeah. So Rickard Zander on keyboards. You got Michael Hackinson on bass. I'm probably saying these names wrong. Patrick Carlson on drums.
Right.
Henrik Donhage on guitars, and then of course Tom on guitars and vocals.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't fault this album, right? And
if you're looking for what Evergrey is great at, with all the great ingredients, without having to worry about guitar changes, tones, things like that, this is the most consistent and most traditional sounding.
Yeah, it's got everything you love about them, right? So it's got plenty of those kind of like keyboards and synths underneath everything. It never like really is too in your face. The riffs are fantastic. The guitar solos completely shred. His vocals are amazing. The choruses are so memorable.
Yeah.
And the songs they're heavy, but they're dramatic and they're slightly progressive. It's what more can you say, right? It's just I don't know. We mentioned a couple albums here that are like absolutely top shelf Evergrey, and this to me just always is like I enjoy this just a little bit more than my number 2 and my number 3, but those are both fantastic too, and I can listen to these over.
Yeah, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll always go back to all the time. Hymns, Inner Circle, Solitude, Recreation, and Search for Truth.
Yeah, yep, it's good stuff. Good band. Yeah. Really underrated band, and a band that I always thought probably should have been a little bigger than they are.
Yeah.
But look at the
Yeah.
times we're in. I mean, it's just, it's not surprising, obviously.
Yeah. I don't think it's weird. I mean, odd or weird that we have almost the same type of a shuffle of all these albums and where they land.
Yeah, you know what? We were pretty yeah, for the most part, we were pretty similar. It's like we had like the same albums at the bottom in maybe different order and similar at the top. So yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know what else to say.
There's got to be something in that,
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe we're not the only ones that share that view then.
Well, that's will be interesting to see. So for everybody watching, there you have your rankings. So I'm really curious how everybody else ranks these albums, because I've been, like I mentioned before, I've been listening to these guys since the first day they came on the scene, and I've followed their career pretty closely. So I've had a lot of time to spend with these albums, and like I said, 90% of this catalog I really love a lot. The others I like, but to a lesser extent. But it's pretty clear to me what their top shelf albums are, what their middle of the pack albums are, and what lower tier, right? Not that really anything is terrible here, but there's like a little bit of separation, and it comes you can kind of do it by era almost, really. But great catalog.
Like I said, it's all, I think, a lot of guitar sound and preference too, when it comes down to it. When you listen to, you take an album like from Hymns, and then you go back to Torn, and then you go back to Recreation Day. If you do it really quick, when you're listening to them, you can hear the difference, and you'll see what you prefer and what you don't prefer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, and we didn't even really mention it much, there are more guitar solos on the earlier albums than there are in the more recent ones.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, everybody, there you have it. Ranking the albums of Evergrey, very cool Swedish band that Rich and I both dig a lot. I'm curious to see how you guys rank them. So please do that in the comments section below. And after you're done with that, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. Visit us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Rich, you want to give a couple plugs for everybody?
Sure. I write for Metal Asylum, if you don't know that. Brave Words, the Metal Hall of Fame. And the Monsters Den with you now too. I do from time to time, which is awesome.
That's right. So speaking of the Monsters Den, so Rich will be joining me tonight, I believe, for another edition.
Later on, yes.
That's right. Later on tonight, we're going to wait till it gets a little dark. We're going to bring that to you tonight.
Yes.
And
we're doing slasher movies. I'll just show you a little box of one of them that I'm doing my homework on. So yeah, slasher movies are on for tonight.
Yes, and specifically 80s slasher films. So that's coming up later tonight.
And not the first string roster. We're doing the
yes.
The
all right.
second.
So yeah, let's clarify. So this is slasher films from the 80s that does not include Freddy, Jason, Michael,
Leatherface, and Chucky.
Right. Okay. So not the big boys, the ones that simmer a little underneath, though equally just as fun, I think.
Yes.
So we've each got 3 picks for you tonight. So that's coming up. And then over the next couple of days, we're going to be back with Hammer Horror Part 2. So you don't want to miss that if you're a Monsters fan. So everybody stay tuned, and we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one. For Rich Catino, I am Pete Pardo. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.